guess we can get started then. Whoever's not here can watch it on YouTube. The title of this presentation is going to be How to Survive the Coming Financial Crisis. And it's coming pretty soon. So there's going to be, this QR code shows was going to show the presentation. If you scan it on your phone, you can kind of follow along if you want to, but it's not necessary. So basically this QR code is a link to this entire presentation. So why you should listen to me. I'm going to give you a quick background history of kind of like a small story of my life as it pertains to financial stuff and the stuff that I've done before. So in 2003 to 2011, I founded a company called ImageShack, and I was about 17 years old in 2003. ImageShack used to be a image hosting service back when Facebook didn't exist. So you had people go into message boards and they didn't have the ability to post pictures, or the message boards would throttle them. And the solution to that was, people would spin up their own image hosting services, but they would quickly kind of go bankrupt because there was no way to fund them. So my idea was to put advertising next to the pictures, and around 2007 was the peak of our company's popularity. We had about 55 million unique visitors per month. In 2008, we got $11 million in funding, and the death knell of the company was kind of like the investment, because this was more money than we ever knew, we would ever knew that we would get, and eventually came time to pay back the investors. And the company kind of went in a lot of different directions, chasing fads, and eventually we spent all of our money, and Facebook became more popular. We had a lot more competition, and we just couldn't deal with it. So in 2011, I decided to kind of leave the company, but through that decision process, what actually happened is this actually happens a lot in Silicon Valley companies, but the board of directors colluded with my co-founder to basically oust me from the company, and I had basically gone broke because I was used to living to the same kind of lifestyle that I lived when I made money, and I didn't have any money after about like a couple of years. So around that time, I kind of learned about crypto. I started a Litecoin mining farm in Springfield, Missouri. And this is actually around the time when I met Eric. So Eric and I hosted mining equipment in this facility in Springfield, Missouri. And the reason we did it is because the power rate there was really cheap. So we could run our stuff for longer, whereas everyone else was kind of shutting down. Like if the power level ever dips, if the revenue that the mining farm produces ever dips below the power rate that you end up paying, you have to shut off or you lose money. So my mining farm and Eric's mining farm there, we were in a good spot. So because we could run our equipment for longer and we could kind of ride out the dips. But eventually, I would say the mining farm was not successful, because the cost of the equipment due to depreciation ended up being worth maybe 20-30 cents on the dollar. And right here I had a choice what to do. I could basically liquidate all of the assets of the mining farm, get my whatever, like 20 to 30 cents on the dollar, and try to do something else. But what I ended up doing instead was I founded a company called gpuShack that sold the assets of the mining company to gamers, like graphics cards. So what I ended up doing was I ended up offering a 2-year warranty on all the cards that I ended up selling. And what ended up happening is the gamers that wanted to buy cards, they were actually super worried about mining gear. They were super worried that it would, that the service, or it was degraded, so like maybe it wouldn't last for very long. But this is actually not very true, and I ended up kind of convincing them of this fact by backing up the stuff that I sold with this 2-year warranty. So through all the contacts that I made in the crypto world, a lot of people had a lot of GPUs, and they were willing to sell them for not 20 to 30 cents on the dollar, but maybe 30 to 40 cents on the dollar. So they were happy because they made more money. And the gamers were happy because I ended up selling these cards to them for 70 to 80 cents on the dollar. So they were saving 20 to 30% as well. So I did this for 2 years, and it was kind of mediocre. It wasn't super successful. I ended up actually calculating that the first year gpuShack made $22,000. So I ended up, founding this company, working 60-hour work weeks, and all I had to show for it at the end was $22,000. I could have, at my level of skill, I could have gone to work and made $100,000 at that time. But I had a rule for myself that I would never work for anyone else, and I tried to follow that rule as best I could. So here's what ended up happening. Towards the beginning of 2016, there was this Ethereum mining craze. So the price of Ethereum went from 20 cents to $2. So it was a 10x increase. And I was sitting on all this inventory for gamers. I ended up actually spinning up a portion of the company to sell the equipment that I had dedicated to gamers back to miners. And then actually what ended up happening is some of the cards I actually ended up selling maybe 5 or 6 times. Buying them up from miners, selling them to gamers, and the gamers would return them, get new cards, sell those cards back to miners. And what ended up happening is I had all this inventory, and the prices of this gear was skyrocketing. So I decided to pivot my company, gpuShack, to service miners again. And this was actually the most successful endeavor that I've ever done. So I created an operating system called ethOS, which is Ethereum Mining Operating System. And I bundled it with the gear that I sold. And I ended up maybe doing about $4 to $5 million in revenue throughout the course of about a year and a half. And in 2017, that was actually our best year. In 2018, after the mining boom had kind of died down, the all-time high for Bitcoin was 19,000. It went down to, 3,900. So no one was buying mining gear anymore. I ended up taking a vacation in 2018 and just not doing anything for 6 months. I ended up moving to Las Vegas and playing poker for a long time. And I thought this was what I wanted to do, but obviously not. I got pretty bored with it. And when I realized that the mining boom would start picking back up again, I founded another company called ASICseer, and ASICseer is basically ethOS, but for Bitcoin mining gear instead of GPU mining gear. So ASICseer services about just under 1% of all of the mining gear that exists in the world. We're hoping to get that up to 3% as soon as possible, but this is basically where I am now. Funny story about gpuShack. The largest amount of money that I ever made was due to one guy buying a bunch of mining gear. It was about $150,000 at the time. He ended up buying it for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was about $200 to $300. So this particular amount I had set aside, and I ended up selling towards the top of the mining craze, which was when Bitcoin was around $13,000 to $15,000. So that's a little bit about me. We'll continue on. So first, I'm going to talk to you about how the financial crisis will affect your life, and then I'm going to tell you why I think it will happen pretty soon, and definitely in your lifetime. So when most people think, financial crisis, and think, oh, okay, this is stuff that happens on Wall Street, it doesn't affect me, I'm here to tell you that that is incorrect. Here's how it will affect you. So goods and services will cost more United States dollars. I'm going to use the term United States dollars specifically for a specific reason that you'll find out later. your current USD, the money in your bank account, the money that you have on you, will not buy as much in the future. So this is kind of correlated. There will be shortages of goods and services. So you may see this stuff already. It takes a long time to get something done. Stuff that you ordered, maybe there's shipping delays. You know, people kind of explain it as logistical issues. That okay, so we have a problem with COVID, and that's why this stuff isn't shipping. But this is actually not true. I'll cover this a little bit later. So along with that, because of shortages, and in tandem with that, the quality of goods and services will decrease. So because your United States dollars will not buy as much in the future, companies have a choice. They really have only two choices. They can either reduce the quality of the goods and services that they provide, or they can increase the prices of the goods and services that they provide. They really have no other option other than, of course, going out of business. And finally, it will be more difficult to find a job. So, why would a financial crisis happen? The reason is hyperinflation. This chart shows the amount of billions of dollars on the y-axis and years on the x-axis. So we can just, for shorthand, call this trillions. So this is 2 trillion, 4 trillion, whatever, all the way up to 20 trillion. This is accurate. This is real information. So this is the Federal Reserve, who's in charge of printing the money, printing it for, little bit per year, not noticeable. Then in 2008, when the first financial crisis hit, they started printing a lot more. And then finally we have 2020, this was March, they printed this much. So it was 4 trillion, and now they have a little bit over 18 trillion. Right now it's 21 trillion. This chart ends in June of 2030. So they did print a lot. More than they ever printed in the history of the world. In fact, they printed so much money that they printed 3 times more than they ever printed in the history of the world. And this is so unprecedented and so ridiculous that there is actually no model for what would happen within the history of the United States. There is a model that would happen with other countries in the past. And here's where I would like you guys to scan in this QR code, but don't watch the video. This is a 3-hour long video, but bookmark it and watch it. This explains what hyperinflation is, why it's bad, and why the United States decided to sort of print all this money. So, a quick recap. When hyperinflation occurs, the money that you have in your pocket or in your bank account or whatever, it's worth less. So technically it should be worth 3.5 times less. But we don't see that yet, and I'll explain why. Why hasn't inflation happened yet? We're going to go back to the quantity theory of money. M times V equals P times Y. And what do these terms mean? M is the amount of money in circulation, the amount of money that the United States dollars that is circulating around in America and in other countries. Velocity is how quickly that money changes hands. Prices is how much the cost of goods and services are, and GDP is the gross domestic product of the United States. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, we are not going to discuss GDP because GDP doesn't change very much. So you can basically pretend that it doesn't exist for the purposes of this formula. So what happens here? If we solve for P, we get P equals M times V divided by Y. Is the same formula, solve for P. So we're solving for prices. We want to figure out when prices are going to go up. So here's what ended up happening, actually. Money, the amount of money printed went up, but velocity went down. And what is velocity? It's lockdowns. COVID lockdowns specifically. So when people are locked down, they spend less money. There's less money changing hands. So you can see by this formula, the price has to stay the same. But if velocity goes up, prices will go up as well. And you can kind of see this happening in states that are open. like Texas and Florida, the prices were going up higher. And I want you to know that everything in this demonstration is backed up by evidence. It's not something that I came up off the top of my head. This is stuff that you can find readily. So here I can show you the chart of the US money supply and the velocity of money. Here we see velocity plummet because of lockdowns, and here we see the prices, not the prices, but the M2 money supply increase. So the M2 money supply increased by 22%, and velocity fell from like 8% to 3% or something like that. So as soon as lockdowns are over, hyperinflation is going to start. And that's when it's too late. Right now, it's not too late, but it's going to happen pretty soon. So you might even see some weird stuff like people in Texas and Florida driving across the border to buy goods and services and then sell them, back to their friends and family that live in those states. And the reason they do that, obviously, is to make money, but this is a very perverted sense of, how would you say, it's a perverted incentive structure. Instead of working, they do this weird speculation, and it's useless work. So because they have nothing better to do, and because either they lost their job or they don't know what to do with their lives, or they're locked down, they end up engaging in this weird money-making schemes. So ultimately, this is a net drain on society, and ultimately, this is the easy way out. Inflation is the easy way out, but the hard way out is to create actual value. Value ultimately is the monetary policy that we have. So the United States dollars measures value, but it's not a great measurement because you can basically, the Federal Reserve can print as much as they want. So when the Federal Reserve prints United States dollars, who gets the most of it? This is in order of most to least. So the federal and state governments get the most money when they print United States dollars. After that, large industries that are so-called too big to fail get them. And these industries, banking, media, tech, transportation, they have very close ties to federal and state governments, and they are the ones that get subsidies that are generated by printing this money. Now, you can probably see either on TV or whatever, people say, oh, it's the American taxpayer that's funding all this stuff. Well, no, not really. It's not the American taxpayer that's funding these operations. The American taxpayer is not bailing out these companies. It's holders of United States dollars that are bailing out these companies, ultimately, because when you print money, you devalue everyone else who holds United States dollars. And then you give it to someone who didn't deserve it or didn't create enough value to do it. They just have like cronyism within federal and state governments that causes this type of money flow to happen. And then you have politicians. The politicians are responsible for delegating the money, and that goes into these 4 industries. And they skim off the top, they skim off the bottom, they skim everywhere. So if you look at like COVID relief packages, I don't know how big they are now, but when I last looked at them, it was like $3 trillion, and then Americans get like $1,200, and this was last year. If you had given Americans the entirety of that money instead of the $1,200, they would have gotten $7,500. So something like 80 to 90% of that money went somewhere else, and we don't know where. I mean, it went to other countries, it went to these 4 industries, it just went to whatever, but not to you, not to your friends and family. So all these people, all these industries get money, and you get none of it. That's basically the gist of it. This video is a 30-minute long video by Mike Maloney. It is titled "The Biggest Scam in the History of Mankind," and it explains why the Federal Reserve, and specifically why central banking, is the most evil thing that has ever been created by mankind. And ultimately, it needs to be gotten rid of. The Federal Reserve steals value from the entirety of the world and then decides what to do with that value, and obviously the decisions that they make are not in your best interests. So many people don't know this, but what is the average lifespan of a reserve currency? First, I'm going to explain what a reserve currency is, and then I will explain why they don't last very long. So these are years. In 1450, the Portuguese real was the reserve currency, and then you have the Spanish real, this Dutch currency, the French franc, the pound sterling, and the United States dollar. And what is reserve currency? It is technically the money that is held by many governments because they believe in it. So in their reserves, they hold this money. And as countries kind of rise and fall and empires expand and contract, the money that people believe in changes. And it changes about every 100 years or about every 95 years. So don't think that the United States dollar is immune to this. So we're actually coming up on the end of the life cycle for the United States dollar, and we don't know what the future reserve currency is going to be, but I have some ideas. So to recap, the lifespan of a reserve currency is not very long. There's about a 20 to 30% chance that a death of a reserve currency will happen in a person's lifetime simply by the law of statistics, because people live about 80 to 90 years, and reserve currencies happen about that long as well. So maybe even more than 20 to 30%, maybe, I don't know, 40 to 50%. It's just like, if you're on your deathbed, you don't really care, but if you're in your years where you can actually make a difference, it's important information to know. So, what can you do about it? In the time you have, which is not very long, here are the 5 steps to basically survive the financial crisis, the coming financial crisis. Stop thinking that the United States dollar is safe. It isn't. Generate as much value as possible, value to the world. Now, why do people generate value? There's many reasons, but the biggest reason is they want to be compensated for it. They want to be paid. I call this value and not dollars because I don't believe in dollars myself. So, don't spend your compensation on useless things. This means save your money, obviously. Don't go out to eat every night. Don't buy useless crap that you don't really need. And then, the money that you save, turn your compensation into real money, more on this later, and sound investments. So I will cover what real money is and what are sound investments. And obviously, nothing really happens unless you go out and spread this message to as many people as you know. Obviously, you want to prevent your friends and family from having problems during the financial crisis. You want to reduce and alleviate their suffering as much as possible. So, what is real money? And there are maybe 7 or 8 characteristics of real money, but I only am going to cover the 2 that separates real money from United States dollars. I'm going to tell you why this is real money and why United States dollars is not real money. So, real money is scarce. It's difficult to make more of it. So, what does that mean? United States dollars are easy to make. The Federal Reserve can make as much as they want, whenever they want. And throughout the history of the United States, we're sort of relying on the fact that they wouldn't, but now they are. And this is very bad for everyone because of the reasons previously discussed. And fungibility is the other characteristic of real money. That means, technically speaking, fungibility means that one type of a certain kind of money is not different than another. So all United States dollars are the same, or all silver is basically the same, or all gold is the same, or all Bitcoin Cash is the same. This means that in the entire circulation of the amount of money that, of real money that exists, you can't really differentiate one type of currency from another. And in the United States dollar, this is ending because there's a certain type of money that it's difficult to spend. And how does the banking industry and the United States government handle this issue? Well, they say if you spend more than $10,000, you have to report it. If you want to withdraw money from your bank account, you can't withdraw more than a certain amount unless you have to report it. Your ATM will say you can only withdraw $800 per day. So they're limiting access to your money, and they are preventing you from deciding you yourself how to spend it. So if you spend it on certain things, they might call it money laundering. If you spend it on what they consider illegal goods and services, they consider it money that's an accessory to a crime, and then they can do civil asset forfeiture where they basically take your money, and then you have to prove that it's yours, and you have to prove that it exists, and that it belongs to you. And typically when you have civil asset forfeiture, let's say you're driving in your car with, I don't know, $5,000 in cash, and you get pulled over, technically that officer can take that money, and then he doesn't have to give it back to you. That money actually ends up being funding the police, whatever, the police station or the whatever police outfit that ended up taking it. And typically the way they'll handle the situation is they'll say, okay, well, you don't have to prove this money exists. Obviously, you don't have to prove this money is yours, but if you just are willing to sell it for half, we're going to give you half, and then you know, goodbye. But obviously, this is just insane if you think about it. But this is how this country operates. So this means that United States dollars are not scarce. They printed more of them, and that they're not fungible because someone else has to be in the decision-making process of whether or not you can spend it, or how to spend it, or what you're spending it on. So what actually fits the characteristics of real money? Cryptocurrencies and precious metals, not United States dollars. So the cryptocurrencies, they are sort of traceable, but if you know what you're doing, you can send them however much you want to whoever you want, and there's no one that anyone can do anything to stop you. So it's hard to stop transactions that are denominated in cryptocurrency, and it's hard to stop transactions that are denominated in precious metals. So if you have precious metals, you can sell to anyone who's willing to buy them, and there's a lot of people that are willing to buy precious metals right now because a lot of people know what's happening right now, the stuff that's been covered in this presentation, and they would rather have this stuff. They would rather have cryptocurrency and precious metals instead of dollars, because they don't know what their dollars are going to be worth 6 months from now, let alone 1 month from now. So with this slide, you know, I say cryptocurrency, my recommendation is Bitcoin Cash. I say precious metals, my recommendation is silver. I'm going to explain why these two are the best examples of currency that is real money. So, the silver short squeeze. This is a 35-minute long video by Mike Maloney that explains how the short squeeze will occur and what a short squeeze is. So, I'm going to cover real quick. Large banks like JP Morgan and banks that are tied to the big finance industry of America, they printed fake money, like we discussed. They borrowed silver with it. Then they sold their silver on the open market. And what happens when you sell in large amounts? You depress the price of whatever commodity that you're selling. So the price was depressed, and you know, it could have been depressed by a lot. We don't actually know what the true price of silver could be, but we can sort of guess. And here's the guess. In terms of the ratio of gold to silver, gold is worth, I don't know, $1,800, silver's worth $25, but the amount of silver and gold extracted from the earth every year is in a ratio of 8 to 1. And I can't do the math quickly off the top of my head, but it's about, if the ratio was the same, silver should be worth $200, but it's not. So this is why, because of this financial trickery that's going on. So ultimately, what is the goal of the banks that do this? They want to rebuy silver at lower prices. They want it because they have so much volume, so much capacity to print money and buy silver. They are able to make a ton of money by depressing the price of silver 50 cents, a dollar, however much. So they depress the price and then they settle their silver debt by buying that silver up at lower prices. So what can you do to stop this? You can buy physical silver. If you buy physical silver, you remove it from the open market, and it prevents the central banks from reducing the price. And because there's such a big paper market of silver and such a small physical market of silver, eventually with enough interest, enough people that are interested in buying silver, the price will correct. So the price will go from 25 to 200, or maybe more. We don't know. But this is what's happening right now. So the two currencies I covered, or the two, let's see, we'll go back here real quick. Cryptocurrency and precious metals. I recommended silver. Now I'm going to tell you why Bitcoin Cash is the best cryptocurrency that you can buy. So in 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto created a paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And here's the first sentence: a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. Now, BCH represents the vision of Satoshi. So Satoshi had a vision of the future where an electronic cash system will exist, and he called it Bitcoin. This is a link to a website called whybitcoincash.com. It basically covers why Bitcoin Cash and not why Bitcoin. So what the difference is between the two and why Bitcoin Cash is better. So here's my point. Bitcoin Cash is the closest representation to the original paper that Satoshi published in 2008. And there is no other cryptocurrency that is similar in that aspect. So you may be asking, Bitcoin, whatever, is $55,000 today. Bitcoin Cash is $800. Why not Bitcoin? It's had tremendous growth. It seems like everyone is super interested in it. Everyone loves it. Well, here's what ended up happening. The incumbent financial system, the same Federal Reserve Central Bank and the people that run it, and MasterCard and whatever, they basically took it over. And here's how they ended up happening. The same people that serve on the board of directors for the investment arms of the companies that invested in the company that develops Bitcoin are the same people that run the central banks. So obviously they think, okay, we're not going to say Bitcoin is bad because that's just going to cause people to say that it's good. What we're going to do is we're going to subvert it. And here's how this subversion occurred. They basically funded a company called Blockstream that limited the transaction of capacity of Bitcoin BTC with high fees. So Bitcoin BTC is limited to 3 transactions per second, which is not very much. PayPal is maybe 150 transactions per second, and Visa and MasterCard are capable of 1,000 to 2,000 transactions per second, so a lot more. And what ends up happening when there's a limitation like this? Well, fees go up. Right now, well, I would say last week, it cost about $20 to send Bitcoin, which is ridiculous. It's not something that you can use on a daily basis to buy coffee or whatever. It's ultimately limited to people that have a lot of money, and I believe the end goal of Bitcoin is to subvert it so much that it becomes a settlement layer for central banks and companies that are close to central banks, companies that spend something like, I don't know, millions of dollars per day or even per hour, and have those settled using the Bitcoin network. So Bitcoin ultimately is not a currency for the people. It's subverted, it's been compromised, and just like with everything, there is a delusion. There's a delusion that results in the price of Bitcoin being a lot and the price of Bitcoin Cash being not very much. So when you invest in something, you want to look for value, you want to look for opportunities. So this is a big opportunity. If you were going to put money into Bitcoin at the all-time high, which is what it is close to now, I mean, that's not great. That's basically you following whatever everyone else is doing. So I don't actually even look at the value of something that I'm investing in. I look to see what are the fundamentals. And I see this, and then I compare it to this, and then this becomes a complete no-brainer to me. And this is why, personally, I have about 70% of my net worth in Bitcoin Cash. If you were to ask me what percent of my net worth is in silver, I would say it's 12%. But for you guys, I would recommend something a little less aggressive, because ultimately you're not looking for really big moonshots at the risk of losing all your money. You're looking for ways to survive. You're looking for ways to save the money that you have and to make it work for you. So what should your portfolio look like? My recommendation is anywhere between 20 to 40% of physical silver, anywhere between 20 to 40% of Bitcoin Cash, and the rest in sound investments. And I will cover what sound investments are a little bit later, but as close to 0% United States dollars as possible, only enough to live on. You want to forget that dollars even exist. The only thing you should really be worried about is having this stuff, because dollars will hyperinflate away and they will not buy as much in the future. I can tell you right now, if you were to ask me how much United States dollars do you have, I would say less than 1%, as close to zero as possible. So what are sound investments? Yield-producing stocks and stocks of companies that produce real, intangible goods and services. So yield-producing stocks are companies that pay you dividends. This is typically 2 to 4%, and this is 2 to 4% per year. And stocks of companies that produce real, intangible goods and services. These are goods and services that would be useful in a shit-hits-the-fan scenario. So stuff like copper mines, energy companies, companies that own assets and produce stuff, even stuff like alcohol and tobacco companies, companies that produce canned foods and services related to distribution of food. So this would be like Kraft or Johnson & Johnson. So this is How to Profit from Massive Inflation Ahead. This is a 40-minute long video by Jason Hartman, and it basically explains that if you have however much 20 to 40% of your net worth in products and companies that produce tangible goods and services and also produce a yield, you're in a very good spot. Because where does this money go when it's printed? Ultimately, it has to go into companies that are close to the financial industry and companies that are tangentially close to the financial industry. These companies would be these companies that are listed, energy, food, distribution, stuff like that. So Eric and I created an example stock portfolio. You scan this code, you'll see a list of companies that basically Eric and I kind of discussed and we recommended for ourselves. So I figured, why not also recommend them to you? You you basically put in the amount of money you're wanting to invest, and then you can actually compare how much money this portfolio would have made over the last 2 to 3 months. So actually, I did this a couple days ago. I ended up, saying, well, how much money would I have made if I put, $10,000 into these companies 3 months ago? Turns out that was like 11%. So it's not much over 3 months, but 11% over 3 months is actually pretty great. $1,000 would have made you another $110 over the course of 3 months. Now, this may not seem like a lot, but when hyperinflation starts, it's best not to have your money in dollars. It's best to have your money in this kind of stock portfolio, so that when it does occur, this money no longer is an asset that basically burns a hole in your wallet. It's something that produces real value. And this 40-minute long video explains exactly how to do this. It's a great watch. I highly recommend it. So, where to buy? Silver, you can buy on AppMex.com. This is where I buy most of my silver. Bitcoin Cash, you can buy on Coinbase.com. And sound investments, Webull.com. I don't know about Webull as a company. I've never used them. I've never used Robinhood. Personally, I use a company called Merrill Edge, which is a subsidiary of Bank of America. But for you guys, I would recommend, here's how I did it. I just went and I looked for a Robinhood alternative, and I found Webull.com. The reason I don't recommend Robinhood is because the same central banks and the same financial industry that is responsible for all this crap is playing against you when you use Robinhood. So they're able to see your trades and they're able to trade against you. And this is the risk that you take whenever you invest, but we know for a fact that Robinhood.com did this, so it's best not to give them business. So this is an actionable thing that you can do right now to increase the amount of money that you make every month or every 2 weeks. This is a QR code for the IRS Form 4, which you can download and fill out. And this is a formula that I created a few days ago that is basically the easiest method to calculate your withholding taxes. This formula I don't think exists, but if it does, I made it without finding, basically. So why do you want to do this? Well, if you received a tax refund for the year 2020, that means you overpaid the IRS. And you don't want to do that, because when you overpay the IRS, you're essentially giving them a free loan, and you are contributing to all this bad stuff that the government, that the federal and state governments do, and the Federal Reserve. So you don't want to do that. You want to use that money, you want to get it and use it for your own purposes, and you want to get it as much of it as you can, as fast as you can. So this is a very quick formula that explains what number to put into what section of the form in order to reduce the amount of money that is withheld for you to be paid to the IRS. So in this example, someone that got a tax refund of $1,100, whose salary was $40,000 last year, and whose salary was $42,000 this year, ends up putting a number called $14,233 in here. And roughly off the top of my head, I would say it would result in about $100 extra per month, or $50 extra per pay period. And this stuff adds up. So here's how to do it. This formula will be available, of course, but it's last year's refund, $1,100. And then you have put last year's salary right here, and you put your deduction right here. The deduction is the same. It's the static value of $12,550. Then you multiply this section by the current year salary, and then you add your deduction back in, and you get a value like this. Now, I apologize. This chart has, this slide has a mistake. This number should be 14,233. So this number and this number should match. It's just I forgot to change it. So when you're calculating salary, salary is how much your boss paid. It's not how much you received, it's how much your net salary before taxes was paid. So it's really the largest number that you can find on your pay stubs or whatever. So this is an actionable thing that you can do right now to increase the amount of money that's that you're being paid. I highly recommend it. So this is called the engine of human history. This sort of explains why all this stuff happens. First, you have hard times, and hard times create strong men. So why does this happen? Obviously because there are people that can solve all of these issues, and they are allowed an opportunity to do it. This is the time when heroes are made. These are people that are remembered for hundreds of years in the future. So, actually a pretty exciting time. So the strong men create a good society. They create good times. Everything's gravy. There's not a care in the world. But a few generations go by, and these good times create weak men. These weak men, they don't need to be heroes anymore. They benefit off the society that was created for them, and society generally weakens. People forget their traditions. People forget why their society, was created in such a way. They think throughout the entire history of their country or nation or civilization or whatever, it's always been good, and they just kind of ride the wave. But just like now, good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. Because there is no longer vigilance, weak men allow their society to become sort of degenerate. Now, I don't mean this in a weird way. It's just, it's not what it was, because it has regressed to before this occurred, before hard times. So now, before good times. So now, hard times again. But of course, this is kind of like a return to the mean. This is, generally speaking, how civilization operates. It's just like for small pockets of time, it seems like everything is fine, which has been the case. But this cycle repeats forever. And this video is a demonstration of why this occurs. This is a 15-minute long video. I forget who makes it, but it's pretty good. It explains this cycle in terms of generations. It assigns names to generations of people that existed in America, and it explains why we are actually right now, right on the cusp here, towards the end of this situation here, where hard times will come. But as I said, this presents an opportunity for strong people to rise up and fix the problems that occur. This is the portion of time in human history where heroes are made and heroes are talked about for hundreds of years. So to end this presentation, I need to say that it isn't all about money, because money is ultimately a way to track value, and value is the most important currency that you can use. So what does this mean to you? You have to become useful. You have to build meaningful relationships with people who can help you and people that you can help. You need to learn how to be self-sufficient. And you need to develop useful skills. Now, what are useful skills? These are skills that you would be using to, in a shit hits the fan scenario. These are skills like farming, or learning how to use a rifle or another type of weapon. This is stuff that would be important pretty soon. So if you were to ask me what rifle can I buy or whatever, I would recommend the Armalite platform because it is the most ubiquitous type of weapon that exists in America. If you learn how to use it, you're going to be pretty good. Being able to find whatever is lying around and learning and knowing how to use it instead of like using some sort of esoteric weapon that no one has, it's not going to be great. I mean, there's also AK-47, but personally, I don't like it. I don't like the accuracy. So I recommend Armalite platform. Learn how to clean it, learn how to field strip it, and learn how to shoot it. Now, some of you are under 21, and in Washington, in the state of Washington, there is a law that says that you cannot buy what's called a semi-automatic assault rifle, and they consider these Armalite platform weapons to be semi-automatic assault rifles. So, how to circumvent this law legally? The Armalite platform comes in two parts, an upper and a lower. If you buy them separately, it's not an assault rifle. That means you can buy it. There's plenty of people that are willing to sell uppers and lowers separately to you. And if this is something you're interested in, I can have a discussion about that as well. So this is the end of my presentation. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the first slide and take questions. If there is a question that pertains to a particular slide, I will scroll to that slide and then we can discuss it.